Thank you for joining us at the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston for today's online worship service. I'm D. Scott Cooper, Assistant Minister of Congregational Life. I'm joined this morning by the Reverend Dr. Colin Bossen, our Senior Minister, and Mark Vogel, our Music Director. Today we conclude our monthly theme of compassion. Reverend Colin's sermon is entitled, "Illness is Not a Metaphor." Now, some of you may be new to our congregation or even to Unitarian Universalism. We are a faith community that believes we do not need to think alike to love alike, and that how we live our lives is ultimately more important than what we profess to believe. We are a faith community that recognizes the importance of fellowship and cooperation and advocates for an individual search for truth and meaning. We encourage spiritual growth within each of us. Our Judeo-Christian roots have taught us the worth of each individual and the importance of justice and compassion. We respect other faith traditions because God is experienced in many ways. We respect the diversity of peoples because love is experienced in many ways. We respect the environment and all her creatures because our existence and experiences are inescapably interconnected and interwoven. We are a faith community that welcomes you to church this morning. We hope you find this service a source of comfort and clarity. Thank you for joining us.
These are the days we have been given, days of sickness and isolation, days of disruption and anxiety, days of discomfort, days when we might find ourselves longing for physical touch, for the rhythm of life as it used to be. But these are the days that we have been given, and though they are strange days, days that are unlike any other, they are our days to use. For outside, the trees are still green. The sun continues to brighten the earth. Our muddy blue ball of a planet persists in its dance around the yellow day star. In these days, the days that we have been given. These are the days that we have been given, whoever you are. Whether you join us regularly for Sunday worship or you are joining us the first time online today, we welcome you. And whatever this day brings, we invite you to remember that whichever days we have been given, be they strange days or beautiful days, they are our days to make the most of. And so, let us make the most of this day and let us worship.
Compartiendo nuestras vidas, encendiendo esta luz. Come sing a song with me, come sing a song with me, come sing a song with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come dream a dream with me, come dream a dream with me, come dream a dream with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find, and I bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time.
Please join with me in the spirit that some call meditation and others name prayer. Make yourself comfortable, relax. Take one deep breath and then another. Open your mind, open your heart. Spirit of life and love, God of many names and mystery beyond all understanding, please hold us in our grief. We grieve for a loss of understanding and to reasonably predict what tomorrow and the day after that will hold. We grieve for the loss of stability in our lives. We grieve for the lives we led that will not return. But more important, we grieve for those who have become sick and those who will become sick. May we join with you in comforting them. We grieve with the families of those who have died. May we join with you in comforting their loved ones. We ask for strength and understanding as we persevere through a time unlike any we've experienced before. We feel afraid, we feel isolated, we feel vulnerable. As the devastating pandemic moves from other places and other people to those we know, we worry for ourselves, our families, our friends, and our community. We know that fear and despair cause us to not be at our best. May we afford those we love grace during these anxious times, even as we ask the same from them. We put pressure on ourselves to be brave and calm when we feel anything but. We put pressure on ourselves to be good-natured and generous with our time. Allow us the ability to take care of ourselves as well as others, to be gentle with ourselves and those around us. Allow us to show our compassion with not only words, but deeds, to help as we are able. And please soothe us as we navigate these baffling and uncharted waters. May the congregation, absent in body, although present in spirit, say amen. We pause now together to lift up that which sits heavy and light on our hearts. We hold in our hearts Jamie Campos, applying to a PhD program, and those students adjusting to online learning. We grieve with those missing their graduations and proms. We hold in our hearts those dealing with food insecurity, as shortages of money and groceries affect us. We hold in our hearts women whose access to health care is being curtailed due to our governor labeling it non-essential. I invite you now to say the name or bring to mind those you wish to be held by the loving embrace of this religious community. They are part of the great cloud of witness and memory, and we will, even if we do not know their names, hold them in our hearts. In this great cloud of witness and memory, Amid this beloved community, we hear these names and hold them in our hearts. Let us remember the suffering and joy amid and among our community that we do not know. We pause in awe and wonder of the mystery that is life, in the spirit of love, in the spirit of hope, and in the spirit of compassion. I invite each of you to enter into a time of silent prayer, meditation, or reflection.
In the quiet of this place, let this moment fill with grace. This is my prayer, this is my prayer. Oh, may the sense of mystery guide us through our journey. This is my prayer, this is my prayer. Oh, this is my prayer.
This week, as last Sunday, our offering will go to the minister's discretionary fund. This is an account that Reverend Colin and I use to help those church members who are experiencing financial difficulties. We use it to help people pay for rent, groceries, and medical care. As you might imagine, there are those in our faith community who are being laid off, those whose workplaces are being closed indefinitely, and those with unexpected expenses. We sincerely hope that those among us who are able will step up to help those who are financially experiencing the brunt of this pandemic. You will see the giving by text information on the screen, and giving opportunities are always available on the website. We invite you to give generously. An offering will now gratefully be received.
Me dice el fuego que es verdad la llama, y el mar antiguo que es verdad la espuma, verdad del canto que se lleva el viento, verdad del río que se va perdiendo.
The fire tells me that the flame is the truth, and the ancient sea, that sea foam, is the truth of the song that is the wind, the truth of the dying river.
Me dice el cielo que es verdad la nube, y el marinero que es verdad la estrella, verdad del viaje usual de toda sangre, verdad del alma huyendo de las tinieblas.
The sky tells me that the cloud is the truth, and the sailor tells me that the star is truth, the truth of blood's everyday journey through the body, the truth of the soul fleeing in darkness.
Que es verdad, me dijeron, la esperanza. Al aire el corazón, al aire el sueño, al aire los pañuelos y el olvido. Que es verdad, me repito, desde el alba. Y ha llegado la noche despacito, y lo quise decir y no he sabido.
That the truth is hope, they told me. Let the heart soar, let the dream soar, let scarves in oblivion soar. What is the truth, I ask myself? Again, since dawn, I have asked myself. And nighttime has slowly crawled up, and I wanted to say it, and I haven't known how.
I don't know about you, but in these strange days, I found myself doing new things. In the last couple of weeks, I've been invited to virtual dinners, virtual dance parties, and virtual cocktail hours. Recently, I was even invited to a virtual tea time. There's a story on NPR about virtual first dates, and my son is getting ready to start online, which is to say, virtual school on Tuesday. And of course, right now you're joining us for virtual worship. In essence, we're doing a lot of new things and calling them by old names. We are in a time of metaphors. Metaphor, Aristotle wrote centuries ago, consists in giving the thing a name that belongs to something else. We use metaphors when we say that one thing is another thing. A metaphor is used to represent something else. Metaphor is essential to art and poetry. And the sun rose dripping, a bucket full of gold, wrote Edna St. Vincent Millay. Love is a stone that settled on the seabed under gray water, scribed Derek Walcott. Verdad del río que se va perdiendo, the truth of the dying river, we find in our morning's reading. The sun is a bucket full of gold. Love is a stone. The river is dying. Each a metaphor where one thing is said to be another. I've come to realize that for me, virtual worship is a metaphor for life as it used to be. This is our third week of recording services here in an empty sanctuary. There's only 4 of us here right now. We're practicing appropriate physical distancing. Actually, we're practicing more than appropriate physical distancing. I think most of us are more than 10 feet apart. We're also cleaning the pulpit and microphones and piano and other equipment each time a different person uses them. In order to safely offer an online worship service, we're even filming everything out of sequence. Alma and Scott recorded their portions of the service prior to me recording mine. Mark recorded much of his music in his home studio. This week, he's not even here for the sermon. Christian and Alma take all of this out-of-sequence audio and video and splice it together to provide you with an approximation of a regular Sunday morning experience. We want to offer you our regular Sunday morning experience. We want to offer our regular Sunday morning worship participants a continuing feeling of connection to the religious community that is the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston. And we want to offer those of you who are joining us online without ever having entered our sanctuary here in Houston or our sanctuary in Richmond, that the knowledge that when we gather again, you will be welcome amongst us. But we do so with the knowledge that virtual worship is not the same thing as in-person worship. You're not watching me preach in a room filled with other people. You're not joining your voices with a crowd of others in song. I hope you're singing along with Mark's excellent arrangements of our hymns. We do all of this in the hopes that our virtual worship will provide you with a sense of connection and comfort during these strange days. Our hopes for these online worship services remind me of a fable from the Hasidic Jewish tradition. In one of his books, the Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben recounts a version of it that he found in the work of the Jewish mystic and scholar Gershom Shloem. The Hasidic tradition was founded by the Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good name, in the early 18th century Europe. He was reputed to have been a pious and wise and compassionate man. He's supposed to have been a great worker of miracles. It is told that when he had an insurmountable problem before him, he would go to the woods in a special place. And there he would light a fire and meditate in prayer. And then the problem that he sought to solve, the miracle he was hoping to perform, would be done. After the Baal Shem died, his successor went to the same special place in the forest. but he had forgotten a little bit about the ritual. And he said, "We can no longer light the fire, but we can pray." And then he was able to work a miracle. The Baal Shem's successor died, and the day came when the rabbi of the next generation was faced with a great task. So he went to the special place in the woods and said, "We can no longer light a fire, nor do we know the secret meditation belonging to the prayers, but we know the place in the woods, and that can be sufficient." And it was sufficient. The fourth generation came into being, and the rabbi of that generation was called upon to perform a great task. But he did not even know the place in the woods. And so he said, "We cannot light the fire. We cannot speak the prayer. We do not know the place, but we can tell the story of all this." And once again, that was sufficient. Our online worship services make me feel like we're somewhere inside of Gershom Schlom's tale. We cannot kindle the fire of our faith together. We cannot meditate together. We cannot go to the woods or gather in our sanctuaries together. But we can offer you a video, a story about worship, what worship might be like if we were to gather. And we can hope that that is sufficient. Most of the metaphors that we are offering these days are offered in the hope that they will be sufficient. We provide each other with the metaphors of virtual schooling, virtual dance parties, virtual dinners, virtual dates, and virtual tea times in the hopes that they will be sufficient to see us through these strange days. But in these strange days, we need to be careful of our metaphors. Some of them can be dangerous. It's unwise to let some things stand in for other things. And here we come at last to the title of the service. Illness is not a metaphor. Illness does not stand in for something else. Illness is just illness. It is not something that should be freighted with moral weight or political valence. It should be recognized as what it is, a global health crisis, and not imagined into something else. For the virus is not a metaphor. The virus is only a virus. It does not represent something else. It is like all viruses, a small, organic, infectious agent that replicates within living cells. It replicates and spreads from host to host, bringing suffering to those who it encounters. The virus is not a metaphor. It does not have consciousness that imagines, that dreams, that tries to discern truth from lies, or refers to one thing by calling it by another name. The virus does not write poetry or create the metaphors of music, painting, and photography. What is more, the virus does not care about human metaphors. It does not respect national boundaries or religious beliefs or race or ethnic identities. It is not, as some would say, a Chinese virus. It can potentially infect everyone. There is no cure. There is no vaccine. And while we must pray that these are found soon, we must recognize that until they are, everyone is vulnerable. That is indeed one of the lessons of the hour, that we humans, no matter how great or powerful, weak or vulnerable we might be, are alike in our human mortality. The Prime Minister of Great Britain has tested positive for the virus. Rita Wilson and her husband Tom Hanks have tested positive for the virus. The basketball player Kevin Durant has tested positive. The playwright Terrence McNally has died from the virus. Indeed, many people, rich and poor alike, have been stricken ill and died from the virus. People in Italy, in New York, in China, and here in Houston. There is a way in which the global pandemic reminds me of a verse from Paul's letters to the Galatians. There is neither Greek nor Jew, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. This was a verse beloved by many of our Universalist ancestors. It bespeaks the idea that God loves everyone, no exceptions, an idea that lies at the core of our Universalist theology and Unitarian Universalism today. It suggests a fundamental and non-metaphorical truth. There is only one human family, and we are each a part of it. Today we might consider recasting the words from Galatians as, "There is neither Christian nor Muslim, neither Italian nor New Yorker, neither citizen nor undocumented migrant, for all are alike to the virus." There are some religious leaders who are saying the opposite, who are saying that the virus must be understood as God's judgment upon this country and upon this world, and that it really is only coming for particular groups of people. If the virus is God's judgment, then the only interpretation that I can find of such a judgment is that we are being reminded, in words also found in the Christian New Testament, that God is no respecter of persons. Words meant to suggest that the divine does not care about human status, but instead loves and calls upon us to love everyone the same. We are being reminded, in the sense of the seventh principle of the Unitarian Universalist Association, that we are all part of the same interdependent web of existence, that we are each, in the words of William Ellery Channing, a part of the great family of all souls. Yet, historically, people have often drawn precisely the opposite lesson from pandemics. They have turned illness into metaphor. One of the oldest ideas in human history is to view pandemics, which we sometimes call plagues, as a form of collective punishment. In such a narrative, one group of people, usually the powerful, label another group of people as responsible for the pandemic. In Europe, during the Black Death, Jewish people were often blamed for outbreaks of the plague. As a result, many Jewish communities were destroyed and many Jewish people were killed. And of course, the truth was that Jewish people had no actual connection to the plague. They were just blamed for it because they were different from the rest of the population, and it was convenient for those in power to have a scapegoat. Some years ago, at the peak of the AIDS epidemic, before there was a treatment for HIV, the philosopher Susan Sontag wrote insightfully about the dangers of using illness as metaphor. She observed three problematic things about illness as metaphor. The first two I've already alluded to. The pandemic is cast as a form of collective and sometimes individual punishment. Responsibility is assigned to a tainted community. And finally, the disease invariably comes from somewhere else. Over and over again, human history has shown each of these ideas to be false. Illness is not a punishment. It has the potential to impact all alike. Cancer, one of the diseases that Sontag wrote about, can strike anyone. People across the world have been infected with HIV. Babies have been infected by their mothers. And though it was once cast as gay cancer, everyone must practice safer sex if they want to reduce their risk of contracting it. Illness happens because we have organic, permeable human bodies that can host viruses and bacteria. Illness happens because to be alive is to be mortal and subject to the possibility of pain and suffering. Illness is not a metaphor. Responsibility for illness cannot be assigned to a single community. The virus that causes COVID-19 might have started in China, but it is not a Chinese virus. It does not recognize the imagined community of human nation. Instead, it reveals the truth that human beings are far more alike than we are different. Whether you live in Italy, China, New York, Houston, or Fort Bend County, you are vulnerable to the virus. Little can be accomplished by assigning blame for it to one group of people. Illness is not a metaphor. The disease might have started in Wuhan. It might have come from there, but the virus is teaching us again that disease cannot truly be contained. Quarantines may slow the spread of the virus, and staying home continues to be one of the best things that non-essential workers can do at this time. But they will not stop it. China paused the spread of the virus and is now trying to prevent its resurgence by isolating anyone who visits the country from abroad. Now, this may slow the resurgence and spread of the virus in China, but the virus will ultimately continue to inflict people there. Eventually, the virus will reach every corner of the globe. For the virus is no respecter of nations, just as the scripture said that God is no respecter of persons. It can only be slowed. Pathogens have always spread across humanity. Smallpox might have started somewhere in the Mediterranean, but it eventually spread throughout the globe. Syphilis might have originated in the Americas, but it is now found everywhere. Every life form can become sick. Illness is not a metaphor. Illness is not a metaphor. Illness is simply illness. But we can learn from illness. It can teach us that the entire human family is in this together and that each of us is vulnerable. All of us are mortal, and our bodies are vulnerable to the virus. The threat of the virus will only end when a vaccine is found. Not a vaccine for some of the people of the world, but a vaccine for all of the people of the world. The spread of the virus will only be slowed when we all act together, engaging in only essential work and practicing physical distancing. And that will only be possible when we recognize that in these strange days, when all but essential work must stop, most of us are economically vulnerable. I already know members of the congregation who have lost jobs. I have friends who are wondering if they're going to have to make the choice between paying rent, paying for medical bills, and paying for food. Some economists are anticipating that the unemployment rate here in the United States will soon hit 20 or even 30%. Such a high level of unemployment will bring about massive social disruption. Many people who might in other times think of themselves as economically secure will suffer. I know of scientists with PhDs who have already lost their jobs. At such a time, we cannot afford to think of illness as a metaphor. The virus is not a respecter of persons, and the disruptions it brings do not care about your level of education or your current economic security. If this pandemic continues for 12 or 18 months, as many think it might, it will most likely upend the lives of most people. At such a time as this, when illness is not a metaphor, we are challenged to rise to meet the situation with compassion. As Scott told us at the beginning of the month, sympathy is the ability to recognize that a person is in pain, and empathy is the ability to experience some of their feelings. But compassion, he continued, is putting those thoughts and feelings into action. We demonstrate compassion when we move beyond simply worrying about other people or the state of the world to try to do something about it. And today we are called upon to be compassionate to the whole world, not just for each other, but for ourselves. Because when we recognize that the illness is not a metaphor, then we come to understand that it can infect and impact everyone, and that the only response to the global pandemic is a globally compassionate one. We do this in part because we recognize that we must protect the most vulnerable among us. It is the moral thing to do, but it is also the necessary thing to do. In some cities, but not in Houston, homeless people are being given sheltered in closed hotels so that they do not spread the virus, and that they are safe during the pandemic. Such an action protects both the homeless and everyone else, for the virus does not recognize rich or poor. The disruptions can impact everyone. Because of this, the disruptions will only be mitigated if we work to provide for all people during this time. And here I'm reminded of another passage from the Christian New Testament, this time from the Gospel of Matthew. There we find Jesus say, "Truly I tell you, anything you did for the people here, no matter how insignificant you did for me. A curse is on you, though, if I can say, for when I was hungry, you gave me nothing to eat. When thirsty, nothing to drink. When I was a stranger, you did not welcome me. When I was naked, you did not clothe me. When I was ill and in prison, you did not come to my help." These ancient words speak a truth in a time of crisis like this, when illness is not a metaphor and when all of us are vulnerable. And the truth is this: the longer this pandemic continues, the greater the possibility that any of us could become hungry, that any of us could need something to drink, that any of us could be a stranger or could be naked without clothes, or be ill, or threatened even with prison. We can only address the health and economic dimensions of this crisis by acting together and protecting everyone. That means that everyone is vulnerable and everyone must be protected. Everyone who needs access to them must be given access to personal protective equipment, Such equipment is now, to slow the spread of the virus, a need for all people and something that the federal government should be mobilizing to produce on a mass level. If not, then local cities and counties must act to stop the gap. Here in Houston, we had a troubling illustration of what happens when personal protective equipment is not available to all only this week. On Thursday and Friday, the Houston Independent School District had to shut down its food distribution sites. A lack of personal protective equipment made them unsafe for both people distributing and collecting food. At a time when anyone can become food insecure, a lack of equipment here in the richest country in the history of the world is making it even more difficult for people to get food. When we recognize that illness is not a metaphor, we also recognize that the only way the virus will be contained is if we coordinate healthcare policy that makes treatment and testing available for all, and that the state of Texas is wrong for declaring some essential health services, such as abortion and family planning, as not essential and stating that they should not be available at this time. Such actions will undoubtedly prompt people to travel across state borders, and in doing so increase the risk that they will spread the virus. At this time, we must treat healthcare for what it is, a human right. And at this time, when illness is not a metaphor, it would be impossible to coordinate efforts to slow the spread of the virus if we do not act as such. It is only by recognizing that illness is not a metaphor that we will be able to end this time of living primarily in metaphors. It is only by acknowledging that illness is not a metaphor that we will be able to return to actual shared dinners, actual dance parties, actual tea times and cocktail hours. It is only by rejecting illness as a metaphor that school and non-essential work will resume. And it is only by casting off illness as a metaphor that we will be able to gather together again as a religious community in worship and in fellowship, and physically unite in that difficult though rewarding task given to us of building the beloved community. These are my words for you today, offered from the city of Houston in the state of Texas in the midst of a pandemic as part of a virtual worship service that is a metaphor for a religious community. In this time of anxiety and illness, I pray the same prayer that those rabbis prayed in that Hasidic tale. I pray that this service and these words will be sufficient. And so I invite you, wherever you are, to say Amen.
us As one we pledge ourselves to greater service, with love and justice strive to make us free. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
We would be one in building a new tomorrow, one in crafting a nobler world than the one we know today. We end our worship invoking the spirit of this beloved hymn, in the hopes that we will all remember, in this time when illness is not a metaphor, the simple truths. We are one human family. We are all in this together. Go in peace, go in love. May our lives be a blessing. Amen.
While our church as buildings is closed, our church as people is still meeting. We encourage each of you to phone or email one another and keep those vital connections going. Various groups from each campus are, or soon will be, meeting online. Please check out firstuuhouston.org for details. Today's online offerings via Zoom include 2 reflection groups, today at 11:30 and 1. These are hosted by our Director of Religious Community, Carol Burris. Check your email or firstuuhouston.org for the Zoom links. The RE for Families Get-Together will be Wednesday evening from 7 to 8 p.m. A new 6-week creative writing group begins soon. It will be led by Adult Programs leader Tony Holland. Contact Carol for more details. Adult and youth small groups are moving online. Participants should watch for an email from their group's leader. Middle and high school groups are also moving online. The Adult Discussion Circle, Changing Women, and the Meditation Group met this morning. Let us know if you'd like to be on their email lists for future Zoom meetings. Please check your email for links, firstuuhouston.org for more details, and email Carol at firstuuhouston.org with questions or to sign up for a group.